Welcome to the Stat AI podcast.
Welcome to the future of emergency medicine, a realm where artificial intelligence isn't just a buzzword, but a beacon of hope and a tool for transformation. I'm DJ Abakma. My co-host Ethan Abbott and I are both emergency physicians, and we have witnessed firsthand the burgeoning role of AI in our field. Our everyday experience grappling with healthcare disparities and social challenges have led us to a pivotal question. In the wave of AI applications, what changes are coming to emergency medicine, and will they be for the better? This podcast was born not just to ask these critical questions, but to seek out answers from the experts, to understand and to demystify the potential of AI in emergency medicine. We believe in bringing this conversation to the wider community to embrace AI as a tool for positive change. This podcast is our exploration of that future, a journey we invite you to join. So let's embark on this path together to learn, to question, and to envision a new era of emergency medicine enhanced by the power of AI.
On this episode of the Stat AI podcast,
we truly need everybody at the table when we're designing, whether it's a device, whether it's a software. And that means the three of us, as well as patients, as well as patients' caretakers, like anybody that might be the end user.
Hey, DJ, how's it going?
Hey, Ethan, doing well. So I had an interesting moment in the department last week. Patient comes in, mid-40s, with some vague abdominal discomfort. And before I can even get through my history, she pulls out her phone and shows me this conversation that she'd been having with ChatGPT about her symptoms. She'd uploaded her recent labs, her imaging reports, and was asking me to confirm what the AI said.
Oh, man. Was the AI at least in the right ballpark of a diagnosis?
Honestly, it wasn't terrible. It had flagged some pretty reasonable differentials based on her history, but it also had her pretty convinced that she needed a specific workup that wasn't really indicated. And it got me thinking, this is only going to become more and more common, which brings us to the news this week that OpenAI has officially launched something called ChatGPT Help.
I saw that announcement. Walk us through what they actually built.
So ChatGPT Help is a dedicated sandbox space inside your ChatGPT account. And I think it's actually separate from your regular chats. The key difference is you can now connect your actual medical records and health apps. So the AI can answer questions grounded in your real data, not just hypotheticals.
So how does the medical records piece work? Are they pulling directly from Epic or Cerner or other databases?
They're partnering with a company called which is a health data platform that connects to patient portals. So OpenAI claims that BeWell works well with about 2.2 million US providers. So you sign into your various portals through their system, and then that data flows into ChatGPT Help. And they're also integrating Apple Health on iOS, plus wellness apps like Peloton, MyFitnessPal, Function Health, Instacart for meal planning, even AllTrails for hiking recommendations.
So the vision is, you could say, summarize my recent blood work and suggest questions for my doctor. And it actually has the data to do that in a meaningful way, it sounds like, from what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And look, people are already doing this. Like Routers reported that health questions are one of the top most uses for ChatGPT. People paste in labs, describe symptoms, they ask for second opinions. So in some ways, OpenAI is just putting structure and guardrails around behavior that's already happening, which I think is reasonable.
Okay, let's bring it back to our little world of emergency medicine. How does this really change things for us in the emergency department, do you think?
In a few ways. First, like my patient last week, right? So we're going to see more patients arriving with AI-assisted interpretations of their own data. And sometimes that'll be helpful. They've done homework, they have specific questions, but sometimes it's going to create anchoring bias or unrealistic expectations about a workup.
And if the AI told them, for example, they needed an MRI, and we're saying, actually, let's just start with an X-ray, and now we're arguing against a computer in that case, which certainly can be challenging.
100%. And second thing is that could maybe be positive, right? So you could have better prepared patients, but if someone uses this tool to understand their chronic conditions, summarize their med list, or translate a dense discharge summary from their last hospitalization, that could actually save us time, which that's the dream.
I think it's like what we talked about in our episode with Dr. Ben Glixford many episodes back, actually, which was episode 2 and 3. The AI sort of as a reporter, gathering and organizing facts, not as an autonomous decision maker. That's the appropriate level of trust for this technology right now. I think you and I have thought about.
Yeah, I agree. But can't belie that first point that you made, which is there will be some disagreements. But let's talk about the part that really makes me nervous, and it really makes me nervous. It's the privacy.
So what are sort of these protections that OpenAI is offering for healthcare data?
So the good news is that OpenAI is saying that health data won't be used to train their foundational models. So health chats, files, and memories are going to be stored separately with what they call purpose-built encryption and isolation. So health memories don't leak into your regular ChatGPT conversations, which sounds okay.
I sense a but coming.
Yeah, big but. It's not end-to-end encrypted. The Verge specifically asked about this in their coverage of this, and OpenAI described purpose-built encryption, but not end-to-end, which means OpenAI can technically access the content in their systems. And for most users, that's probably fine, but it matters for breach risk. And probably the big one is legal processes.
Legal processing, meaning like a subpoena.
So OpenAI told The Verge, again, in that same coverage, that they would provide access where required through valid legal processes or in an emergency. And here's the other critical piece. HIPAA doesn't apply anywhere here. So OpenAI's head of health was explicit about this. HIPAA covers healthcare providers, insurers, and their business associates. When you as a consumer voluntarily share your health data, tech company, those protections don't automatically follow.
So if someone's sharing sensitive information, for example, mental health records from their psychiatrist, reproductive health data, gender affirming care, this would not fall under that domain.
And in certain states right now, that's not a hypothetical concern. The data you share with ChatGPT Health could theoretically be obtained via court order. And I'm not saying that's likely, but it's definitely possible. And patients should know that before they connect their records.
So let's talk about accuracy. What did OpenAI do to validate this for the healthcare usage scenarios that we're describing here today?
They claim they worked with over 260 physicians across 60 countries over 2 years. And Ethan's laughing here because, full disclosure, Dr. Abbott was one of those physicians. And those physicians reviewed model outputs for more than 600,000 times. And they also developed something called Health Bench, which was an evaluation benchmark with 5,000 realistic health conversations and physician written rubrics. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. Was it substantial?
It was quite substantial. Unfortunately, I can't discuss what we did, but it was substantial. But I'm guessing from a more objective standpoint, you do have concerns about this.
I do. A few. First, physician review isn't a clinical trial, right? We don't know the methodologies specifically because of data use agreements. You've never even been able to tell me about it. We don't know the selection criteria, like what review actually entailed. And second, this isn't funny, but Health Bench is graded by GPT 4.1. So they're essentially grading their own homework.
Yeah, and I agree. That's probably not how sort of peer review would work in the real world.
Yeah, you can't be your own peer. And then there's the fundamental question we discussed last episode, or actually it was a couple episodes back on when we talked about the Apple paper, the one showing that LLMs struggle with basic logical reasoning when you add irrelevant information. So performance dropped up to 65% on frontier models. Obviously, they've gotten better since that time, but if these systems are doing sophisticated pattern matching rather than true reasoning, we should be cautious about how much we trust their medical advice.
One thing I do like when ChatGPT Health summarizes your records, it can cite back to the source. So if it says your hemoglobin was low in March, you can click through to verify. That's, I think, the right design pattern, right? That's where we think there's a lot of power in these tools.
Figures you would say that. No, I'm joking. That's right. That is pretty cool. So bottom line it then, for our listeners, how should we think about this?
I think I would break it into two, like good use cases and risky use cases. So I think the good sort of use cases are asking it to summarize labs before an appointment, translating perhaps a dense radiology report into plain language and generating questions for your primary care doctor or the physician you might be seeing on that particular visit. I think that's patient empowerment. That's what we want. We want patients to come in with informed about their own health.
Right. And then risky, I think we both agree, is using it as a diagnostic tool. What's wrong with me at 2 a.m. when you're having concerning symptoms? OpenAI actually explicitly says it's not intended for diagnosis or treatment, but we all know how people are actually going to use tools versus how they're intended to use. Take this with a grain of salt.
I think one more important distinction, however, is OpenAI also announced a separate product called ChatGPT for Healthcare aimed at organizations with actual HIPAA compliance support, business associate agreements, audit logs, and customer managed encryption. I think this is certainly a different product. So if your health system thinking about a deployment, that's something that you could potentially leverage. And I don't think we should confuse that with the consumer version of ChatGPT Health that has with enterprise tools.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. Maybe we'll come back next episode and talk about that enterprise version of ChatGPT Health once some people have gotten a chance to use it and write about it. We're certainly headed towards a world where there are consumer AI tools for health literacy and preparation and clinical AI tools with proper regulatory frameworks for actual care delivery. And I think we need both, but we need to be clear about which is.
All right, we'll keep following this as it rolls out. Right now, it's still a limited release with a waitlist for US only medical records and Android support coming soon. So we'll link those sources in the show notes for our listeners.
Yeah, can you imagine there is a wait list for people to share their information willingly with the tech giants? But hey, we want to hear from you. Have you tried ChatGPT Health? Would you connect your medical records? You can hit us up on LinkedIn or leave it on our voicemail if you go to our Stat AI podcast website. Link will be in the show notes. We'll check back on this in a few months when it's more widely deployed and see how it's actually playing out.
Sounds good. And speaking of AI and healthcare, today we have Resa joining us to talk about some interesting topics and her own experiences as an emergency physician at the intersection of artificial intelligence. So let's jump into that conversation.
Let's do it. Welcome to the Stat AI podcast. Today we're here with Dr. Resa Lewiss, who's an adjunct professor of emergency medicine at Brown University, TED Med speaker, designer, and award-winning educator, mentor, and point-of-care ultrasound specialist. She studied at Brown University, the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, the NIH Howard Hughes Research Scholars Program, and the Harvard Emergency Medicine Program. She served as chief resident in her final year of training. She graduated in the first of the class of ultrasound fellows at Mount Sinai St. Luke's Roosevelt, near and dear to our heart. She hosts the Academic Emergency Medicine Education and Training podcast and her own The Visible Voices podcast, which is where we first caught on to her. She's been designing conversations in the healthcare, equity, and current trend spaces. Her podcast has been featured in The Guardian, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Brown Alumni Monthly. Her writings is widely published in medical and scientific journals, over 130 PubMed entries, and the popular press. She's written for CNBC, Fast Company, Harvard Business Review, Stat News, no relation, Nature, the Philadelphia Inquirer, MedPage Today, Doximity, and Slate. She has a lifestyle medicine column, Lewis on Lifestyle Medicine on Helio.com, and most importantly, to today's conversation, she is the co-author of the book, MicroSkills, Small Actions, Big Impact. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Lewiss.
It's wonderful to be with both of you, and thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. We wanted to start with something very specific, and then we'll see kind of where things go. In your work as an educator and mentor, you've seen physicians at all stages of their training navigate technology adoption, some successfully, some not. Can you paint a picture for us? Tell us about a physician you work with who was struggling with the pace of technological change in emergency medicine.
So this is a fantastic question, and we can see many examples in our own lives outside of medicine. If we all have parents or grandparents and seeing all the changes in technology over time, did they adapt to wireless phones? Did they adapt to computers, the internet? I'll give an example of online banking or being able to bank from your phone. That is very foreign to my parents who are in their 80s who are still alive. swing it back into the healthcare environment and the emergency department, I have worked with all different stages of trainee. And unsurprisingly to you, to the audience, college students, medical students, residents are much more facile with learning, say, ultrasound. But when I entered the point of care ultrasound era, and I did my fellowship from 2002 to 2003, it really got robust and ballooned for residents. And then, of course, then there were more and more fellowships. And then it moved downwards towards medical students. But I would say, and you two even expressed this in our pre-meet, I'm not sure it ever really elevated to the level of faculty, because there's something that happens when we finish training. Somehow, like, the growth mindset and the learning engines power down.
Yeah.
And they go either on sleep mode or something happens, and it's the way we train is the way we end up practicing. And so I think one of the nuts that's been hard to crack is how to get people who have already been out in training to utilize point of care ultrasound. And I have tried all different ways in terms of when I've given, for example, workshops. And I've tried like active learning with flipped classroom, have tried simulation. And there's so many opportunities even to go into the sim lab where it's psychologically safe compared to doing it on shift or in the emergency department. And what I'll say is the big thing that many of us say in point of care ultrasound education is everybody needs that aha moment where they make a diagnosis, where they save a patient, where all of a sudden the whole care plan pivots. And you can't plan for those. They spontaneously happen. If it's not in the water that people drink when they're in training, it's really hard to get them to pick up the probe. And again, this is a specific example with ultrasound. There are many other technologies than ultrasound. And though I never give up on anybody, it's never too late to learn. I personally try to have very much a growth mindset. And that even circles back to what we see in the book. And I think at the end of the day, we'll talk about alcohol and other drug addiction. A person has to decide it's what they want for themselves in terms of stopping or working on the addiction and the use disorder. I think the same thing is with a technology. People have to decide they want it for themselves. You can't make someone want it.
It's such a great point. I think, specifically with the growth mindset, I know I felt this myself. The moment I came out of residency, I happened to be conference chief. So it was my job to make sure that not only was I learning all the time, but that the entire residency was learning all the time. And the moment you get further away from that, I wasn't required to go to conference every week, and it was no longer my kind of primary focus. You really had to retool and say, okay, so what are my deficits and what do I want to do about them? So I think that really makes sense to me. For anyone out there who is dealing with this sense of falling behind, maybe just reemphasize what you said. What would you want them to know?
Are we specifically speaking with ultrasound?
Yeah, with ultrasound, or I guess with technology in general.
Yeah. In the book, we talk about MicroSkills to gain subject matter expertise. And that advice is for any subject matter topic. And so let's take AI, which happens to be a focus of the podcast.
Yeah.
There are conversations, one-on-one conversations that you can have with someone at a coffee shop. There is joining a podcast or listening and being a devout listener of a podcast where they're talking about it every week or with a regular cadence. There are signing up for newsletters. There's following certain thought leaders on LinkedIn or on fill in your social media channel of choice. But I think those are mostly passive, but one active way would be to have conversations. And I think at the end of the day, you have to actually put yourself in situations where you're using the technology, using the ultrasound or using the AI. And I was thinking about this ahead of time because you were nice enough to share a little bit of talking points. In the 1990s, I was in residency. I was just about to finish residency and get my first job in the community. And we hadn't had flip phones like smartphones. And also, I was not facile with the internet. And I had a friend who is very much in the tech industry and a venture capitalist. And she was using this thing called the internet. And she said the World Wide Web was going to be huge. And I was like, I don't know how to use this thing. So I would make myself every day practice the World Wide Web and like how to use it, what it meant, like all these things. And I think similarly, I've actually adapted as a habit every day. I'm working on something with AI, getting better at my prompts, looking at the different options to create slides or create talks or generate content. And so I think it's like most things, slow and steady, break a big, large, overwhelming task into small, actionable behaviors and steps. Oh my gosh, I'm taking us back to MicroSkills, but like literally slow and steady wins the race.
That's great. I think that actually is perfect setup for my sort of next question, which is for listeners who haven't read the book yet, again, MicroSkills, can you give us kind of like a 60-second version just so we can get everyone on board? And what exactly would you consider, what is a microskill and why does it work when sort of other approaches to professional development, those maybe traditional approaches, fail?
Yeah. I want to thank again you, both of you, for being willing to highlight the book because I obviously very much believe in it. It is literally the book I wish I had been given when I was starting out. And it is a playbook, so we can make a sports reference. It's like getting a copy of the playbook. You're about to play football, and here are the plays. You need to know them. I didn't get a copy of that playbook. And there are many of us, for certain reasons, obvious, less obvious, we don't get a copy of the playbook. And so over time, like I've done great. I've done fine. I'm worked hard. I've figured out ways to learn how to get things done. But gosh, it could have been quicker and easier. So all of us, and I shared this example of the World Wide Web or even ultrasound, we are met with these overwhelming tasks or these goals or even these habits. And people have probably heard about habit stacking. In a way, this is analogous. So a microskill is a small, intentional action or behavior. And if you break one of those big, large, chunky things down into small steps, it's much more digestible. It's much more doable. And I think one of the first times in my professional journey that I attacked something this way was when it came to academic writing.
Yeah.
I didn't consider myself a writer, and I broke it down into 3 steps. Reading about writing, actually practicing writing with people that were much more experienced than I was, and then editing, like becoming a peer reviewer for our academic journals. Those 3 things helped me learn how to more comfortably, confidently become a writer. And so I think if we think in that way that almost anything is achievable, if you just break it down into small steps, you feel like you can actually attack it and slowly go at it in small pieces, that then those pieces work with each other over time to achieve the big thing.
I think that makes so much sense. So to bring it back to this podcast specifically, instead of learn AI, which is overwhelming and very vague, you would be saying, do one specific thing for 10 minutes. So, let's learn about large language models and use a large language model and see what applications there are.
Exactly. And even what we mentioned earlier about becoming a subject matter expert, like every day read something, or every day listen to something, or every day find another newsletter. There's small pieces, and then you start becoming familiar. It's that repetition frequency. You're like, oh, I know what these terms mean now because I've now been exposed to these terms over a 2-week period.
That's a great insight. I think we also have been thinking about this kind of bigger question, which is what are the essential micro skills for emergency physicians and clinicians navigating the AI era? I think as DJ alluded to, there's not everything you could possibly do, but what matters most. And I think we'd love to hear how you build a framework around that and refine in a way to refine your expertise and walk away with something actionable.
Yeah. I'm going to point again to the book and the specific chapter on developing subject matter expertise. You had asked about the book, and for listeners that aren't familiar, it's a 10-chapter book. It's a leadership book, and we can apply it as we are today to AI, but it can be applied to virtually any industry and any job and professional journey you're on. So back to the AI, and the reason I keep pointing to the subject matter expertise is, when you don't feel like you know a lot, when you don't feel like you're an authority to speak on something or to write on something or to podcast on something, there are ways to gain it. So it's speaking with experts. I already talked about reading, talked about listening, like to podcasts, But I think at the end of the day, you have to do the work. You have to use the tool. So there's deliberate practice, which is, again, like checking out different types of large language models. There's also reading the literature, or as I like to say, literature. If you read the PubMed literature on AI and emergency medicine, see what the new startups and the health tech companies are coming out with. There's a lot coming out with ultrasound and AI, from home health and teleconsults to also for people that are novice users, having the machinery help with interpretation. If you're not sure, is that an A line or is that a B line? Is that an abnormal number of B lines and therefore the lungs are full of an interstitial process? Or is this just a normal finding and a normal lung sliding pattern?
So just distill that again for our listeners. So let's say microskill number one, then my personal hypothesis is that one of the biggest barriers to adoption of anything is really that decision paralysis and kind of that time of, I'm really not feeling comfortable about this. I could never really be an expert. But what you're saying is you really, at some point in time, you just got to take that leap. And so for AI, there are dozens of tools and physicians may not know which one is worth their time. So maybe microskill number one in this context could be like doing a 10-minute test where it's okay, I'm going to pick one AI tool this week, use it on exactly 3 real cases. And again, I'm not telling you to please don't put PHI into it. Please do not do that. But use it in some way that you can make sense of it and then make a decision at the end of that 10 minutes, whether or not this is a tool you'd want to keep, modify, or even abandon if it's not really suiting your purposes. Does that kind of align with how you think of skill acquisition?
I love that human-centered design, and a lot of what you two have put together is very human-centered design. Let's put the end user at the center and see what works and iterate with them. So I think that's great. The other thing I'll say aloud that I think we all know is even if people are resistant and don't want to work with and learn AI, it's happening in their clinical environments, whether it's ambient scribes, whether it's UpToDate that now has an AI prompt in it and it's being utilized in that way. And there are people that have their note writing that is being utilized. The EHR already has an integrated large language model that's happening. And so even if they're like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be responsible, I don't want to, it's already happening. So I think, I'm assuming the audience knows, like, it's not if, it's when. And so we have to adapt. Healthy growth mindset adaptation would be like, all right, it's coming.
Yeah.
Let me learn, let me read, and actually find a person. So this is another microskill. Chapter 1, MicroSkills for Self-Care, is about your personal board of directors. We all now probably have a friend that's that AI person. Say, hey, can I chat with you 15 minutes this week?
Yeah.
If the talk goes, hey, can we talk 15 minutes now? Like, pick their brain, say, what are you looking at? What do you read? What are you listening to? So then you're not overwhelmed with all the options, and someone you trust is telling you, here are my go-to resources. It's like asking people, like, what do you read? And people are like, I read the Wall Street Journal, I read Harvard Business Review, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to read those things. Go to people you trust to then go to the sources you trust.
That's great. I think, mentorship is definitely key. Maybe pivot to like a very specific example using POCUS or point of care ultrasound. I think there are a lot of AI tools now that we're seeing, Caption Health, Butterfly IQ, and some AI measurement tools that are out there that claim to help with both image acquisition and interpretation. If an emergency medicine physician or clinician wanted to apply the microskill number 1 to POCUS AI, what would that actually look like in practice?
Yeah. I think, first of all, it would mean going to whoever your point of care ultrasound experts are in your faculty practice or in your clinical situation, to ask them and make sure you're aware of what machinery you have. And the machinery you have, like, where is AI playing a role? Because I think sometimes we're not even aware that AI is on and happening. And I'll say EKGs and EKG analysis and interpretation, that's AI.
Yeah.
But as I was growing up in medicine, no one said, oh, by the way, this is AI. Yeah. It may have been not a learning model. It was a static model, but that was artificial interpretation that was often wrong. Yeah. And so...
Still is.
I heard that it's programmed by plaintiff lawyers. Is that true?
But go to your subject matter experts. Say, what machinery do we have? And does our machinery have AI? So then you can start being like, oh my gosh, that's why that dotted line shows up when I'm trying to get images of the four chambers of the heart. Or, oh my gosh, that's why the green line is on when I have a good image and my aorta is in view versus a red image, which means I'm off the mark. Find out where it's happening live and now. In general, what I've seen in terms of AI with POCUS, a lot is for people that are more novice. It's helping educationally. There are for sure applications for advanced measurements. Again, I'll just point back to the heart, advanced cardiac measurements that sometimes are beyond the scope of what we're doing in the emergency department.
Yeah.
But AI in radiology and interpretation has been around forever. And arguably they're one of the specialties that's the most advanced in terms of integration of AI.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
So I think that we have covered kind of the skill acquisition. I want to make sure we hit a couple of your micro skills. I think the other skill that you talk about in the book that I was very interested was about communication. And we know from lots of your work that's absolutely central. And AI is really going to change what patient communication looks like. We're already seeing it with kind of these AI generated discharge instructions, automated summaries, and even patient portal messages. The translation practice, I think, giving a skill to our users, and you'll correct me if you think this is a good or a bad idea, maybe once a week we could take something that is AI generated, whether it's a clinical summary, a note, a discharge instruction, and rewrite it as if you're explaining it to a sixth grader, and then actually send that version to a patient or a family member. Would that be a useful framing for the communication micro skill?
So you're spot on that I think communication is key. And we call the chapter polished communication because within medicine, we have to communicate a lot. We're communicating in the electronic health record. We're all emailing, we're speaking. As doctors in training, we're presenting patients. So there's an element of communication. I think discharge instructions can be so difficult. And to be clear, I think a lot of times they're not read. And now, of course, there's the patient portal. There's all different ways that people are getting their discharges. One of the things I'll say is discharge instructions are already written in theory for like people that have a fifth grade or sixth grade or seventh grade, or basically understanding that the literacy level of everybody varies. And so I don't know if that exercise, I think people would be like, why am I going to do that? I think we have to come up with an exercise that people would think was fun, maybe even gamify it.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in gamification, but I think what you're getting at, and this is something with which I agree, is no matter how far, I'll say that sounds good. No matter how far we go with AI,
yeah,
what should never get lost and what will never be replaced is human connection. And so I think if we can figure out the ways to maintain that human connection, rather than the AI discharge for after your every fifth patient, you personally go up and say the discharge instructions and have the patient repeat the instructions or their understanding what you just shared back to you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So the feedback loop.
Yeah.
I think that's a really amazing example. I think maybe you could even be even more specific. Like, for example, in your own sort of practice of emergency medicine, a time when you had to translate complex information, maybe ultrasound findings or a complex diagnosis to a patient who was scared or confused, and how that micro skill could be deployed in those cases.
Yeah. This is a very smart, nuanced question because we think everybody understands what we're doing when we're performing an ultrasound examination. And every year of our ultrasound fellowship, we had ultrasound fellows, and the fellow had to do a research project. And I will specifically mention the project of a fellow where we were talking about educational scans. So for listeners that aren't aware, in the emergency department, we do ultrasound examinations at the bedside that are part of patient care. Maybe they're to help make a diagnosis. Maybe they're to help perform a procedure like place an IV. But in the teaching hospitals in which I worked, the majority, it was considered okay to do education scans, meaning some people call them practice scans, but there had to be full disclosure and the patient would give oral consent. Now, things have moved along the line that now there's actually a written consent and things have gotten more stringent and clear. But this project was so interesting. We thought that patients understood when we said, this is an education scan. You won't get charged for it. It's actually not going to be interpreted or be a part of your visit today. And it may have nothing to do with why you're here. And people are like, okay, yes. And we did that the way Resa would talk. And then we actually used a script. And what we found that in general, that patients did not understand that this was a education scan. They thought it was a part of their care. They thought they were going to get charged for it. And also, when we adhered to a script, there was more clear understanding than it was just Resa explaining or Ethan explaining or DJ explaining.
Yep.
And so that was, wow, like we think we're so clear. We think we're so communicative. And patients, they are scared. They are people pleasing because we're the doctor and there's a power differential. Who knows what? Who knows? There's all the reasons that we could come up with why. But I think it's exquisitely important to always keep that dynamic in mind and also realize that a lot of times people don't understand. And so back to your question, I think there are many times that we think people understand what's happening and they don't, because this is so what we're used to seeing and doing. And the energy of the place doesn't agitate us, but I think the emergency department agitates and makes most people not feel at ease, not feel calm, which obviously we understand why.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit of that's how you're cut out for EM. If you feel calm in the AED, there's something probably a little off with you, but it means you found your home. I think that's really powerful the way you just said. And I think what's interesting about AI is it can help with the first draft of that translation. But the human skill, to me, that you probably really can't replace, at least not anytime soon, would be knowing what each specific patient needs to hear in that moment. So are there things that you're keyed into, and like, how would you teach that?
Yeah. I love this question because you're focusing on the fact that teaching point of care ultrasound is so multi-stepped. And that language and the language we use with patients is so very important. And I think that's not emphasized enough when we're teaching ultrasound. I'm going to use the example of point of care ultrasound of the heart, cardiac ultrasound. I began to notice that it seemed that when patients came in with shortness of breath, undifferentiated dyspnea, or undifferentiated chest pain, that would be an indication to do a cardiac point of care ultrasound. And it seemed that more of the men patients were getting POCUS examinations than the women.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been studied and it's been borne out in the research numbers wise. And here's what I think in general, people aren't learning as commonly on women. And women have breasts and perhaps there's adipose tissue. People may have higher BMIs. And so I think people are like, I'm not sure what to do. Also, we don't completely undress patients, even though we know we're supposed to completely undress patients.
Yeah.
And so I will say one of the things I deliberately would teach is how to have the patient help us. Because to be clear, most patients want to help us with patient care. They're scared. They want to help and they're glad to help. And by the way, it's their bodies. So what I have found, say, forget the breast and the heart. We'll go back to that. Say we need to do a suprapubic bladder scan. If I say to a patient, can you actually shimmy your pants and your unders down to your hips? They're glad to help rather than me yanking down their clothing. That's just one example. So similarly, if we have a woman patient and we're going to be doing a cardiac exam, I'll say, can you turn on your left side and put your left arm up? With your right hand, can you take your left breast and elevate it a bit so that I can put the probe right underneath where your ribs are? And basically, then the patient sort of feels in control, feels they're participating. This is, again, they've consented to the examination and you've explained to them what you're going to do. But you're also basically instructing them how to turn, where to place their arm, how they can feel a bit covered, but also isolate and open up the space where you need to put your probe if we're doing sort of not a parasternal lung, but an apical 4. And that explanation of teaching trainees how to have the patient help you and simple language, people can follow the instructions. People are like, oh, it's really not that hard to get the views. I'm like, no, it's not. But I also understand that if they're fully dressed and if they have a bra on and if you're not sure and you want to be respectful, like there are ways to have them help you. They want to help you, you help them. And then you ultimately get a 4-chamber view and you're like, oh, good. There's no pericardial effusion and the LV looks great. It's pumping well. Like, win.
That's great. Amazing. Actually, we had a follow-up question already on deck that I think addresses some, or tries to touch on some of these equity issues. Do you think there's some of these AI tools could help to address some of these issues you're talking about? We've talked about simple AI multilingual tools. I think the most sort of pedestrian example may be these new generation AirPods, but do you think some of those tools can address maybe some of these issues we're talking about? And are they ready for prime time? And will they address those gaps? I think it's a little bit of a leap maybe from the example you described just now, but wondering if those tools might be able to address some of those issues.
I'd love to help tie this in because I see where you're going with it. And quality in, quality out, junk in, junk out. That's number one. But also who's building these tools, who's training these tools.
Yeah.
And as I've been playing around with these large language models, I tend to be respectful and polite. And I'm like typing in, please, thank you, can you, could you? And I started, honestly, doing a little bit more vertical leadership talk down. That's horrible. Fix it. And basically, I have noticed that the more, again, vertical leadership talking down to the LLM I am, the better my results have been. I don't think that's a good thing, but that perhaps gives a clue into who's training and developing these models.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'll say. I do think this is going back to human-centered design, and what I love about what you're doing, and even in sort of the prep discussion we have and you shared with me, is this is human-centered design. So we truly need everybody at the table when we're designing, whether it's a device, whether it's a software. And that means the three of us, as well as patients, as well as patients' caretakers, like anybody that might be the end user. And I think it doesn't always strike people. Recently on LinkedIn, someone was saying, oh, if you want to read about AI, here are all these newsletters. And the newsletters were all authored by the same demographic of person.
Yep.
And so I said, I think there's other demographics of people writing newsletters. So I think it's got to be on our radar for mattering. Yeah. And I think going back to MicroSkills, if you've ever been marginalized in the workplace, if you ever didn't get a copy of the workplace playbook for whatever reason, then you know what it's like. And so it's on your radar. But I think if maybe you haven't had that experience, it's not as quickly your default or on your radar. So I think like we can help bring that on other people's radars by pointing it out.
Yeah.
Ethan and I, not to toot our own horns, but we did just release a paper with JSIP Open, which is meant to be a primer on AI bias, which you hit a lot of the points we discussed, which is make sure that you have all of the demographics that are going to be using it, all the key stakeholders at the table before you start this design process. And when you're using a model, think about who it was designed for, whether or not that process was adhered to. Think about the data, where it came from. We know that EHRs are famously porous for the type of information that they carry. They have very good at tracking vitals, but maybe not so great at tracking social determinants of health.
Yeah.
That kind of mindset, I think, is exactly what you're talking about.
I love that word, porous.
Just thought about it in real time. So I think another thing that is really helpful in the book that you talk about is energy aware scheduling. The idea that not all hours are created equal and that we should protect our high energy time for important work. And I wonder if you could take us through that, where every AI tool is promising to save us time and energy, whether or not it's ambient documentation, which I disagree with that, but automated triage, some smart summarization tools. And yet it doesn't seem to me, when I talk to your average emergency physician, that they feel less burned out. So something must be off.
Yeah.
So is there a way to do an energy audit for AI tools and think about it?
I love the question. I love the word audit. I think it's important for us to take personal board of directors audits, as well as life audits, as well as everything audits. So yes, the answer is yes, we need to audit. So I'll first say, in terms of energy and time of day, the literature shows that if we've had 7 to 9 hours of good sleep, we wake up and we have a lot of energy. We're very focused. So the morning is when we should be doing our focused mind time, be it writing, maybe it's clinical practice, and maybe in the afternoon might be when we do meetings or things that don't require as much focus or brain waves. And in fact, as a prelude to the book, I want to use the word prelude there. We wrote a piece called 4 Reasons to Say No to Early Morning Meetings. Because we know in medicine, specifically in academic medicine, 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m. meetings are pretty common. But we talked about health-wise, it's not good for us. Like physically, if we have to wake up earlier, at home, if it messes up our home routines, be it getting kids ready for school, we take our morning run, we take the dogs out, we help with elder parents, fill in the reason. Our mental, like maybe that's when we write and now we can't write. And then finally, this circles back to what you just asked about burnout. And the question is, what can we do? Because it is epidemic. And you're right. I think AI makes this promise of helping with this epidemic of burnout, and no one has seen that happen yet. Now, number one, I think we're early on. And so I think there's a lot of spaghetti being thrown at the wall, and we're seeing what sticks. And so the clinical environment is just chock full of all these new tools and these new rollouts, and who knows what will stick and what will ultimately prove to save time and save energy. And one of the reasons why it may not result in that much energy and burnout savings is because at the end of the day, we're responsible. We are responsible. And I spoke with Dr. Sarah Jabauer about this. She writes this amazing newsletter called LLM for MDs. And at the end of the day, medical legally, we're still liable.
Yep.
And I don't know if ever the AI tools are going to take off that responsibility. And that's okay. But if it can get really good, then we can at least let down our guard a little bit to be like, all right, generally, this is getting it right. But let me check the places that I know it may not get it right. I think that there's never one like perfect solution, but I do think there's enough coming out that we're seeing from the hardware, the devices, to the software, that things are becoming easier, just even by the fact of the way we generate our show notes for our podcasts or the way we're able to edit our podcast episodes. There's no question we're further along, but we're just not there yet. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think we're always going to have the human responsibility.
Yeah, totally agree. Is there a way you think in a sort of maybe a more almost in a methodical way? DJ and I have been using kind of research tools to determine whether some of these technologies are improving the care of patients. But I wonder, when you evaluate a tool for time and energy management, is there a way to evaluate that in a methodical way? Are there ways to compare whether or not this new AI tool is actually working for me and improving my time and energy management?
We can start with basics like on a 0 to 10 Likert scale, like how likely are you to recommend, or how much energy, how energized do you feel? Like, I think it would have to start with probably basics, basic human responses to the technology, and then over time figure out the measurable aspects in terms of actual time, quality. But I think even getting that initial human reaction to something, because this goes back to even the emergency department of agitating your nervous system versus quieting your nervous system. I think the same reaction people have to technology and to certain tools.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Can you think of a tool where you tried and thought it was help and then realized actually it was creating more work? I think a lot of us use these tools to edit things that have AI capabilities and can generate almost generate content on their own in some ways. Can you think of an example maybe where you tried it and realized actually you ended up with something that was actually more work to edit or to deal with?
I love this question because I think I've been having it almost every day that I keep trying a different AI tool. And I tried it recently. I was trying to create art, and I think it was Canva. And Canva has AI now, and it wasn't generating anything like what I wanted.
Yeah.
My differential, because we're in the business of creating differential diagnoses, is number one, Resa, it's you. You're not really good at creating the prompts that are going to work. You're not speaking its language, and it's not understanding your language. Number two, it's really early on in the process, and it just isn't a mature tool yet, because I've seen tools improve. But then is the question that I've improved or the tools improved or both? So I think there's a learning curve, but I think we all have our like walk away moment when you're like, this is too much work. Yeah. So I think with all these things, there's going to be a learning curve, what I described with the World Wide Web or AI. And then once you see progress, then you stick with it. So I walk away when I'm not seeing my ability to integrate it and having it make a difference, for example, in my clinical care or in my academic work. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
no,
that's,
yeah.
go ahead, Ethan.
No, I was gonna say I think I get into these like loops with some of these tools where I'm like, oh, this is like really cool, and then I keep iterating, and then I get to the end of the where the product, or like your example of using Canva, where I have a diagram or a figure for a paper gets spit out, or for an article I'm writing, and I look at it, I'm like, oh, this is exactly not what I wanted, and then I'm starting over, and I could have just either built it in a piece of software that I'm familiar with. So yeah, I definitely identify with that experience.
I was just going to validate you and say, I also cannot get Canva to work when I want it to work. I try. And again, please, Canva lawyers, don't come after me. I'm sure it's a me problem, but it seems that I invest a lot of time using the AI features specifically. If I go in and I arrange the things in Canva, yes, it works just great. But when I click that magic AI button or whatever it's called, it always seems to just not be correct.
Exactly. Like no affiliation with Canva. I use Canva for my podcast, but that specific tool, just, I couldn't make it happen.
Yeah. And so I wonder the MicroSkill version of cutting things out or guessing permission to quit, because I think there are a lot of people who feel obligated to keep using a tool once they've invested time learning them, even if they're not working. We're like, this is the one I know. Is there a way, you touched on it, but is there like a concrete thing where you stand back and you say, you know what, I'm just going to let this go? And how do you get there?
I love the tie-in back to MicroSkills, and I say yes. So we talk in the book a lot about the power of the pause and when to say yes to an opportunity and when to say no to an opportunity. We in medicine, and it's not so different in other industries, we're always taught to say yes. And the reason we say yes is, number one, we're told to. Number two, we think it might be the next big break or the opportunity we've been looking for. Or if we say yes, maybe it's because we want to work with this person, even if the actual topic or project doesn't excite us. But there are many reasons why we say yes. But we really talk about this concept of, rather than FOMO, fear of missing out, to really embrace JOMO, joy of missing out. Now, we didn't come up with this, but it's very powerful, because if you can really be sharp about what you want to be focused on, what you want to be working on, there's so much more joy, and it's so much healthier in terms of your professional journey than to have things on your plate or things you need to finish, or like dangling modifiers, like these dangling projects. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm not even that interested. I just want it off my plate. So it goes back to something called the power of the pause. And so to tie back to our example about AI tools, and if we just can't get them to work, like pause, being like, okay, I've been working an hour with this tool. It's just not doing it. So I think we all have different time limits or different energy limits. So it's okay to walk away, and it's okay to say no. And by taking that off the plate, you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute. You know what? I was able to create this really quickly in Keynote or in Google. And sometimes AI is not going to be the solution. What has gotten us to where we are now? There was nothing wrong. So why don't we go back and use some of the tools that got us to where we are, knowing that we need to stay open to new tools and new ways of doing things. So I think the power of the pause, joy of missing out, and just, this is even, forget AI. Say I'm trying to have a conversation with someone. Say I want to have someone come on the podcast. And I keep trying to schedule a meeting, We go back and forth. When something is really that difficult and it just isn't organically happening, and I've been working for 3 months to try to set up a meeting with someone, that says something. And I've had those things where I just keep working on it. I was like, pause, Resa, it's been 3 months and there's no meeting scheduled. That's a clue. Take a pause, maybe circle back in 6 months, or maybe this is the message. But I think, so almost all these things we've been talking about today, it's not just limited to AI, but AI is certainly a perfect example for all these microskills.
I wanted also, just in terms of we're getting towards the end of the conversation here, which has just been absolutely superb, and we so much appreciate your time on the podcast today. Going back to a little bit more sort of technical stuff with point of care ultrasound, since this is really your expertise and domain, what has transformed the field in terms of AI enhanced ultrasound interpretation, and who is benefiting most from this technology? I think the way DJ and I were thinking about this question before coming on was maybe a little bit more from the equity lens. So in terms of hospitals and health systems that have machines that can run this, who's benefiting from this and who's getting left behind? And this applies, I think, to a lot of conversations we've had with experts in the AI field, across software and hardware as well, where some health systems are just going to be left in the dust.
Yeah, I love this question. And I too think a lot about who's moving ahead, who's being left behind. And
Yeah.
in the tertiary and quaternary centers, that's not what's happening in most of medicine, community medicine, rural areas, and what I'll say is even global health areas. So there are a lot of people that go into ultrasound that are interested in global health. In fact, they'll often do an ultrasound fellowship because they want to do work outside the US in resource limited environments. And you actually don't need to leave the US to find resource limited environments. You can find it in some inner cities, you can find it certainly in rural America. And especially with changes that are happening in terms of healthcare and reimbursement, I think these things will only worsen. So, arguably, ideally, these AI tools, specifically with ultrasound, will help in places where there's not a POCUS expert, but there are people in federally qualified health centers or
Yeah.
in rural medicine primary care clinics or in people's homes if we move to more the hospital at home model where a primary care office can send an ultrasound unit and the technology is such that people just need to know where to put the probe on themselves. And the clinician through telehealth can read the image and make an interpretation. In fact, we did a proof of concept of this that was just beautiful at my last institution where patients in primary care clinics, we had them see if they were able to just get images of their antecubital fossa, kind of thinking like IV use
Yeah.
/ patients with opioid use disorder and injection drugs were often looking potentially in that area for cellulitis versus abscess. And the proof of concept worked. Like they were able to be directed to just obtain the images that
Mm.
were deemed by the clinician, the other side of the telehealth screen, to be like, oh, I could interpret that if I needed to. Now,
Wow.
granted, this was like skin, not known to have pathologic or abnormal findings, but I think we're going to move that way to a telehealth experience. Resource limited. In fact, I think a lot of the companies are building this knowing that not everybody has completed a fellowship. And quite honestly, not everybody's even interested in ultrasound. They would hope, I think there are many emergency medicine colleagues that hope ultrasound would just go away. But I don't think it's going away, nor do I think it should go away. I think it's actually safe patient centered care. And I really do think that there is a focus on places where there might be more limited resources, that AI can enhance the hardware and the diagnostics so that the clinicians can feel more comfortable with the interpretations.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I was expecting a slightly different answer, but that's actually amazing to think about it from opening up opportunities and equity for these types of health systems. That's amazing.
Yeah. What did you think I was going to?
I wasn't sure when we talk about AI deployments, some of these tools are potentially unavailable just because of cost and computer infrastructure. But I think with what you're saying, which is interesting, I think with at least with point of care ultrasound, that embedding these tools within the machines is not really the rate limiting step necessarily. So yeah, so it's a kind of it's a totally different perspective, which I think is great. It's kind of making me think a little bit differently about this question that we've asked many times before. So it's great.
Cool.
All right. If we can do, I think, one final equity question, because Ethan and I love our equity, to close this out, maybe. As we train the next generation of emergency physicians, how do we make sure that they're learning to use AI as a tool for equity, not as a crutch that's going to let them avoid the hard work or turn in their homework, so to speak, but really understand the patient and, again, maybe also go back vertically so that we're not leaving our older or more seasoned faculty behind? How do we make sure everyone comes along on this one?
Yeah. I think there are many answers to this question. So I'll say a few things that I think we have to think about and about which we should be intentional. Number one is deployment. And, the place at which you insert the technology. Is it when people are already fully formed, meaning finished with training? Or is it being implemented and integrated amidst training? I do think AI is going to be added to, for example, medical school curricula. I think AI will be added to residency curricula, fellowship curricula. So what about the decades of people that are in practice and will continue to be in practice that didn't get the AI 411, the information? So I think education, I think intentional implementation, communication. I'm just thinking of all these ION words. But it sounds like it, but like this is really, I don't think there's any short stepping this. I think you have to be aware of the different levels of learner. And in that way, it's very similar to, I think, the deployment and the challenges we've had with point of care ultrasound, the deployment of AI. And I think just like the younger generation, it's so interesting. The younger generation, like, they don't want to talk on the phone. They're not used to speaking on the phone. If I make a phone call, they're like, am I in trouble? Why are you calling me? Whereas I grew up when there was no call waiting. There were no answering machines. I remember when answering machines came in. I remember call waiting came in. We just called people and you got a busy signal. And if it was busy, you just called back. But this evolution of technology and of communication, younger generations are very facile with, it is going to be more difficult for people that are out in practice, people that are even towards the end of their practice, they still want to be in the clinical environment for another 10, 20 years. There's going to be adaptation. And this is what we see with hospital systems. It's forced adaptation. And for the people that don't want to play the game, they opt out. They sit out the inning. I'm just using a lot of sports references here. They sit out the inning or they retire. And there's plenty of things to do. But I think those people, speaking of design, people in later eras of their career are just as important to have at the table to make sure that things are being designed in a way that will serve them as well.
Oh, amazing. Oh, that's so good. What a great way to close it out. For our listeners who want to go deeper, and where should they start? And obviously your book, MicroSkills, is a foundation. What other sort of resources might you recommend just for listeners to take a look at?
Yeah.
And please make sure that they have some different demographics of voices so that we keep a rich tapestry of people we can be listening to.
Absolutely.
Are you asking who else should I think they should check out? Or
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Because yes. So I have a mosaic, a tapestry of podcasts I listen to, of newsletters I read, of books I read. And I'm going to think about whether I'll name names, not because I won't name names, but I hadn't thought of who comes to the top.
Sure.
I would just offer that I am glad to have conversations with anybody that might be interested in terms of a place to really, I think, read and follow along voices and thought leaders in the AI space and even in the healthcare space and even in the professional space. I think LinkedIn is a really good place.
Yeah.
And it's free. And I don't necessarily think you need to join the pay-to-play level. And it's a really good way to get some passive mentorship and even passive sponsorship. I definitely have seen and participated in professional opportunities that I found out through LinkedIn. But there are a lot of healthcare professionals there, and there's a lot of AI talk happening there, and there's plenty of point-of-care ultrasound stuff happening there. So I would say sign up for LinkedIn, and you don't have to talk, you don't have to do anything, but you can follow along. And that's true of many of these social media outlets. I think Instagram is another educational place to follow and see videos and see people. And you don't have to be a content maker, but you can witness what's going on and keep up in that way. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewiss. This has been such a valuable conversation, and we want to be respectful of your time. So this is going to be our last question. Before we let you go, what's one thing you want every listener, every emergency physician listening to do this week to start their journey on building MicroSkills?
Oh, great question. This is not an active microskill. It's more of a mindful microskill. The first one is, I want you to trust your gut. I want you to always trust your gut. And what your gut tells you may be different than when someone else's gut tells them. But I think literally you have to trust yourself and trust your gut. The active microskill I'm going to say is self-care. And that means taking one action towards avoiding ultra-processed food. Please don't drink the soda. I'm just saying these in terms of nutrient benefit. That's one thing. Think about your sleep and how you might want to improve your sleep. Think about how you want to improve your people relationships, not your relationship with your phone. Yeah. And finally, and this is for the medical audience, I on my own podcast, have a lot of personal finance people, and audience members have expressed head scratch surprise. But I think part of taking care of yourself is taking care of your financial health. And they don't tell us enough about it. They don't talk to us about it.
Yeah.
And it's a predatory world, and doctors can be the object of a lot of that preying in terms of financial services. So educate yourself, read newsletters, podcasts, but take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, community-wise, and financially.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's such a true point. I think I got 0 hours of instruction on financial training in medical school and come out with this ability to earn, but not really all the skill sets to protect your earnings. So that's a great way to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate your time, Dr. Lewiss.
I loved our conversation.
So much time, so much of your wisdom came out through here. And I think for any of our listeners who want to follow up more, you can go to www.resalewis.com/microskills-the-book, and you can check it out there. Anything else that you would want us to direct them to?
No, reach out and connect on LinkedIn. Yeah, check me out on my website. It's where I put everything I write, everything I speak on. And I'd love to be in touch with anybody that wants to talk about any of the topics we've touched on today.
And we can attest she is extremely responsive. I honestly didn't know that or think you would really respond so quickly to us, and you did, and which just kind of speaks to your character as a mentor. And so thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, appreciate it a lot.
Thanks again.
All right. Thanks so much for listening to episode 19 of the Stat AI podcast. If you get a chance, check us out on X and Instagram and our newly updated website, stataipodcast.com. And make sure to tune in next month for some more amazing content. Thanks so much and take care.
Please note that the views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent those of their employers, our sponsors, or any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and educational purposes and is not intended as medical advice. We encourage you to consult with qualified healthcare professionals for any medical concerns or treatment decisions. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.